Hey guys, so I just wanted to record this video because I figure, some folks might prefer to read, some folks might just want to put on, video and just kind of lounge and absorb this information. But I wanted to go over my notes from just kind of my audit of Tailwind v4 and just kind of summarize a few of the things that are on here and maybe even show like some examples and that kind of stuff. So first things first, I will link this in the Tailwind channel, the team channel, so you will have that available to you. I believe it's already there, but I'll post a new version in just a moment. But a few things to just kind of call out here at the top, just links to the documentation. It links to theme variable information. So if we're looking to extend Tailwind, these are the properties that we have available to us. The namespace, the CSS properties, if you will, the design token sort of structure there. And then here's all the default values that come from Tailwind by default. So there's quite a bit in there, but that's the kind of stuff that we will tweak and adjust and override if need be. The other nice thing is that they have upgraded the playground. So if you come to the playground, you can see this is now got kind of a new design, and it's using I don't know where it listed. Yeah, right there for version 4 currently. So if we need to quickly like test something, we can. I'll start with kind of improvements. These are like the positive or kind of the exciting things that are coming or that I've noticed. It looks like they've obviously switched to native cascade layers, which are CSS native now and not a Tailwind only convention. So that's very nice. It's very useful. You'll see that components is listed on there. I will call that out in a moment. So just if you hear me say, "Hey, I mentioned components a moment ago," this is what I'm referring to. They also have the obviously the concept of at theme, which is brand new, and this is bringing to the table like a dedicated place for you to find all your CSS custom properties or your variables, right? That you then consume and use throughout your application or modify with themes or what have you. So a couple takeaways with that we'll cover in just a moment. These are in no particular order, but just kind of going down the list. The first thing to note is that Tailwind has absorbed all of the pretty much all of the plugins, as far as I'm aware, that were not already kind of baked into the core. So this is very similar to what happened with aspect ratio, which was a Tailwind plugin, and then they absorbed it into the core, and it became a core feature that you no longer had to have that plugin. Same thing goes now for forms, the typography plugin, and container queries. So those are all just stock core features now, and no plugins required to do that. I am really curious to see if they ever try to add additional, plugins like that. Maybe they're just going to focus on rolling those in the core and major releases or something like that. So interesting to see. The other thing to note is they do link off to their browser compatibility, so you can see what browsers they support, and as of when those were released. This will be kind of critical information we'll want to link to in our documentation, just to say, hey, this is what Tailwind supports, so this is what we support. Now, this is only CSS style side of things. It's not JavaScript logic for components, so we'll need to kind of put a distinction there. The other nice thing is they now have new directives that I don't think we had previously. They're like variant, where you can specify, hey, I'm going to have a element. I'm going to define background white, and then in the dark mode, when dark mode is triggered, switch it to black. That kind of thing. In order to do this in previous versions, at least as far as I was understood, you always had to use the add apply syntax to be able to kind of utilize those kind of features, the variants and stuff like that. So having that kind of like an explicit thing means that we may possibly be able to author a lot more of our styles using kind of a native CSS structure. And what the benefit of that is that it kind of helps future-proof us a little bit and maybe makes it where we won't necessarily support things outside of Tailwind yet, but if we ever need to, Tailwind implodes or something like that, we don't have all of these styles in format that we can't take and move somewhere else. So that's definitely a consideration. Now the way variants work, might work very different if we went to say, I don't know, CSS or something like that. But it's still very interesting that you can do that. And so I am considering maybe as part of our rewrite, we look to get away from add apply and utilize that. Now, Apply is more compact, so there is some benefits to it as well. But again, some pros and cons there. We'll weigh that. The other cool thing is that they do, obviously still provide the means to define your own custom variants. Variants are the things that you typically see like hover with the little colon in the middle. But kind of says, hey, when it's in the state, then the style will apply. And so they give like an example of how to do that against a particular theme, so like a data theme. So here's an example of how we could use that. So when like theme service is in place, then we can use, make the background red, or with Mona, it's this. So there's a lot of like, I was kind of already starting to document some of that in our, and as far as like how you can customize, but it was a little bit like verbose in that it required like to set up your own kind of custom, like, yeah, stuff like this. So you had to do like target the theme and then the property and then define the values, and you were creating all these like can styles. Now Tailwind just kind of handles all that, which is super nice. So this can go away in favor of that. We can actually build these variants ahead of time for all of our preset themes because we know what they're going to be. And then we can kind of provide instructions for users on basically do this if this is if you want to follow suit for your own custom theme. Follow this pattern, and you now have this way to target each individual theme, including your own. So extremely cool feature there. You can now use Apply, like fully use Apply inside of Svelte and Vue style blocks. So it was always a little hit or miss. Like some features would work, some features wouldn't work. Like all the Tailwind primitives worked, but like skeleton features wouldn't work, stuff like that. So the way they're doing is they're adding a new reference that links back to the original global style sheet, which has all the configuration, and then everything just kind of works, hunky dory like you'd expect. So. Again, a nice addition. We don't use this very often, but there are a few edge cases, typically with like animations or something where we might put in some default styles, and it's nice to be able to do that with a style block inline inside of a component. And then my findings for just kind of going through and setting up some example themes, or just like a very like bare bones themes. This does align with what Malta provided the other day in his notes. Those were up here, somewhere in this channel. I don't know. I'm not gonna look for it right now, but know that that is still, does appear to be the recommended way to do that. The only thing that I'm going to kind of recommend as a change was that I think when he showed his examples, he was importing skeleton last and themes first, so these were flip flopped. But if you think about cascading, right, the cascading flow, you typically want to define your base variables and then overwrite them with your own custom theme, settings. So if the default value is black, but in the theme it's blue, then that's the kind of order of operations you want. And so this will link off to what is essentially the new core, which is the replacement for the plugin. It would look something like this when it's all kind of compiled down. Like it'll be split into modular parts that we author separately, and then all kind of compiled into like what will likely be a single style sheet. We'll call it skeleton.css or whatever that might be. But the interesting take with this is that unlike Tailwind today, where all of your properties come from your theme, like if your theme is not applied, you guys have probably seen this with, you don't apply a theme or you forget to update your theme on the body tag, then you get this kind of like basic like white page with black text, and there's no theme colors, and there's no styles and that kind of thing. That now kind of goes away because we will have default values provided for every sort of like property that we use. And so like you may not have all of the utility classes and stuff if you haven't imported this, or like if you basically if you've imported this but you haven't imported a theme, you're going to have a default theme. That's kind of like the end all be all here. So you will have a default theme, whereas we didn't have this concept of a default theme in previous versions. Like even the current version in V3, you always had to append a theme before those properties were populated. And so that's a big difference, which makes me wonder how we want to style that. Like perhaps we take the default settings that we're using for the Cerberus theme, and we just build those in as the default, or we come up with something that's a little bit more generic, like kind of a monotone, something like that, very like basic, kind of settings. But then themes are just a customization on top of that. So you have the base settings, and then you're overriding those, and that's what a theme is. It's a set of overrides, not the base itself. So that's very cool. It does open up some possibilities for us to do some other things with theme files, like import, setting, base styles. Like maybe we want to adjust some kind of style we want to make every heading italic, or something like that by default. We could do something like that. Although that's a little opinionated. I don't know how far we want to go with that. And then what it would look like for the theme itself is, again, like you set the base values, and then you target the data attribute here for the theme name. This would be Cerberus, not custom, obviously. And that just allows you to override that, that color value with whatever value you want to supply, and then whatever, like font styles or any of those properties, those namespace values that have changed, kind of override those in place. So very cool. Extensibility is going to be a little weird in that users would be able to essentially, you can't have like multiple instances. So like right here, we would have, all of these imports. And then after that, you could have that theme, and then have your own user kind of defined value still kind of in place here. And so this is taking the place of what the Tailwind plugin is doing now, where users have to go and define all their customizations and stuff like that there, or generate their own plugin. Like that now kind of, moves from Tailwind config to just being something there. Because you can have multiple instances of that theme. That's kind of what I'm getting at here, which is kind of cool. And again, precedence here. This is here, and then this is overwrites it, and then the one, after that overwrites that. So that's all really cool. I kind of mentioned it above, but the concept of theme extensions can potentially return, where we would have, the theme properties populated, but then we could have like a, a mesh gradient or something like that you could append. So we would do something like where we target, hey, when it's this particular class, then and you're appending this this attribute, and then you're adding this class, you get that result. So when this is the theme set and the class is put in the same on the body or wherever the class is defined, the theme is defined, you will get that result, and you'll get that theme. Or you could take it and apply it like selectively if you want it to go somewhere else, where so we could do something like separated. I don't know. There's some room for discussion there that is kind of interesting. Let's see. And then the other thing here is that color transparency works really cool in a really cool way. So to kind of describe it in terms for Tailwind v3, the only way to do transparency was to set all of your CSS custom property values for colors as RGBA colors. And that A is the alpha channel, which is where you set transparency, right? So you have red, green, blue, and then alpha. So that's your transparency on alpha there. So we had to convert all of these colors. So if somebody would define a theme with hex colors, we had to convert those to RGB values so that we could put in a variable that controlled that alpha channel. And that would kind of work within Tailwind's kind of conventions for that. Now, all of that goes away, and they just use color mix. And so it's simple as this. So background color mix, it defines it identifies what type of color is being mixed. It plugs in the first value, and then your transparency and what kind of property you're doing. So it's doing that. And what's cool is that while this is an example using OKLab, that you could replace that with hex, or you could replace that with RGB, or you could, all these different other color options. You can then potentially use, because color mix just pairs with all of those and handles that separately than the definition of the color itself. So that is really cool. Again, it does give us kind of options for how users can define their theme. They could potentially author it in different formats. We could just have a toggle of like, send us your color in hex, and we'll just plug it in hex. Send it in OKLab. We'll plug it in as OKLab. But the takeaway is it stays verbatim from what the users has defined and not converted for them, which was always a little bit weird, where you'd go in and you look at a theme and it's like, oh, I supplied all of this in RGB, or excuse me, in hex, but now like I'm getting all of these, like RGB values, and it's very weird because it doesn't really quite follow the format that you would expect and stuff like that. So like that alone is like a huge improvement for colors. There is also an alpha CSS property that's just part of Tailwind by default. You can do all the kind of fun stuff you would imagine, like passing that to a component and changing that all down through the tree in the component or something like that. So some cool stuff that you can do with that. These next two are kind of validating for Skeleton in that these are features that we had built into V3 that we can now pull out and replace because Tailwind has just absorbed them into the core. The first one being conic and radial gradients. So those are just built in. You can see, the options for it. It works with all of the syntax that they're providing for that. They are doing some interesting stuff here where it's like, I need to look at how they're doing so many colors. Like that's not quite what I would expect. This has the center point offset, so I need to look at how they're doing that with the add and the 25% and stuff like that. So it is doing some additional features that we couldn't do prior. So that's even better than what we had, and it replaces a feature we were having to build and maintain. Likewise, spacing is now just a value that's built in, so you can set this at any scope in your project, even at the theme level, and any kind of value that depends on that, margin, padding, etc. They just automatically update with the scale. It works almost one-to-one with what we're doing. Again, it's just built in. And so we can now make this still a property that's defined in your custom theme, but we will, but it all kind of works with Tailwind's, system with no extra functionality for us having to implement that. It's just there by default, and we just use the property. Kind of in a similar vein, to like spacing, there is animate, which lets you define custom animations. So if we ever want to take we do some custom animations that we provide for things that are used in components, like progress bar animations and stuff like that. So we can now kind of just follow the convention for that. But long term, this is a feature I'd like to build out further in Tailwind, which is, building more primitive animations that folks can use, because the handful that they provide in Tailwind are nice, but they're a little limited. So there's like 3 or 4 of them. And then this is another thing that's just kind of like a news update. VS Code extension is now fully working as far as I can tell. So things like color values that I think Malta and other folks have reported is not working are now working for me. You might need to update your version of VS Code or the extension, but you can see like the custom color that I've defined in my theme is coming through, and it's showing the kind of calculated values and everything, which is really nice. So that's all updated. Should just work for you. Now that was positive stuff. The kind of negative stuff, or things that we're kind of going to potential issues or things we'll need to overcome. First things first, it's just the sheer amount of issues that's already popping up on GitHub. So Tailwind's got their issue tracker here. You can see anything tagged with the little like V4 in parentheses here. So that's the kind of stuff that should be expected. Like we'll see it for our stuff as well when we launch. We'll put it out there. We'll have a much bigger user base using it. They'll find issues we didn't find, that kind of thing. But there are some notable stuff that we will need to watch for. Like gradients are not smoothing properly. There's still some like precedent issues where like hidden class is not taking precedence. And then some undocumented changes that are not just undocumented, but don't get migrated as part of the migration tool. So, those are some things, some key ones, but I'm sure there's other things that we're going to find where it's like, this just worked in Tailwind v3 and now it doesn't. And we don't know why. So we need to maybe need a little diligence and just ensure we're reporting those as we find those. I'm not really going to go into detail this. This is just kind of noting the fact that we are rewriting the plugin because it's all CSS configuration. That's just a given. That's what the whole point of all of this audit and the rewrite is for. So just highlighting those points. The only thing I did kind of spell out a little more explicitly here is just the fact that there will be sort of 2 different build events that we kind of take into account for Skeleton. One is when we build the skeleton core library, so that we build that skeleton.css file that everybody will then consume. We should have a build step for that, and that step should be where we take maybe some JavaScript logic, then compile that, run that, and that generates CSS styles for us and that kind of thing. That stuff needs to happen, during that sort of, again, that build step for us. And then there's the user, the build for the app itself, for the users consuming that. So when that happens, a lot of things that the users have written and we've provided, those all get bundled into the final CSS bundle. So just again, highlighting that and calling that out explicitly. I did run through and start with a Svelte kit project using Tailwind v3, which is still the current default, and then migrated it to v4 using their CLI. The CLI tool works really well for migration. It did everything you would expect right out of the box. The only kind of big negative is that it just outright deletes the Tailwind config file. So if you had a Tailwind config and there's anything that you needed to reference from that, we'll need to make sure to caution folks that they need to save a copy of that themselves, or make sure that they have that in their Git history, because when it's gone, and you can't, reference it after the fact, because order of operations are folks are going to migrate to Tailwind v4, and then migrate skeleton to the new version as well. So yeah, some fun stuff there. The other thing is it does provide some default boilerplate code if you have migrated, just to match what certain styles look like before. There's just a couple things with like border color and things like that. In most cases, we can probably just leave that up to folks if they want to use that, but we need to take that into account with how we actually implement our styles. So if we're expecting that boilerplate to be there to work like the v3 version, then that kind of thing. Just make sure we take account of that. Now, kind of speaking to this kind of second point of like the cons of it deleting the Tailwind config, one of the gotchas with that is that it needs to be able to, we unfortunately do not get to escape the context feature that we use in Tailwind. So when you come in here and you set up your Tailwind config and you have to, append that context to search for where your styles are, that kind of thing. This little bit right here, the context or content, sorry, wrong name, but we can no longer use this, handy little function that auto searches for that, which is important because obviously we've had a lot of support issues, that this addressed. Like, no longer do folks have to think about it; we just resolve it for them. Now users will have to know where the package lives in their node modules, and they're going to have to, set that path, and that could differ based on the relative path of where the style sheet is to the node modules directory. So it's going to be a little rough. I don't have a perfect solution for that in mind yet, but it's something we can hopefully figure out. So let's look back in the notes. But it looks something like this. So if you need to reference elements and things like that are outside the scope of your project itself, use this @source directive, point to the directory that you want to make sure is included. By default, Tailwind is now looking for many more places within your application for where styles might exist, but it still does not include the node modules, which is where our components live, which means that we still have to kind of jump through that extra hoop to inform Tailwind, hey, there's going to be classes that you need to pull from these components that are in this node modules directory. This also does mean that the Vite purge CSS plugin that Adrian wrote is still going to be required in order to prune out those extra styles that they will put into your bundle that you don't actually want. So unfortunately, we're still going through that back and forth game. Maybe this is something we raise with Tailwind to see if they have any kind of ideas or plans to fix this over time. But now that they're using a Vite plugin, first class, maybe they're solving some of that, or maybe they built some of that in there. I don't know. We'll have to investigate that. The other kind of odd thing, and I pointed this out earlier, right, was there was this idea of importing the Tailwind directives, and there was a components reference, right, at components. Components are what we use for like buttons or cards or any of those that we define in Skeleton. So they are kind of a critical feature, but they're not really represented in the new documentation. So if you go and look at the directives, you can look through here and you can see, hey, there's utility, there's the new theme, stuff like that, but there is no components. It's not even in the like compatibility list down here of things that they're kind of deprecating. But it is referenced in their, in their blog posts. So I don't quite know if it just works and it's just not documented, or what's the thing here. Because if you look at the old documentation, like there's your base, there's your utilities, there's your variants, those all kind of work like that. But components is MIA. So we'll need to follow up with them and ask what's up with that. This is the last kind of big thing, but the typography, I think this is going to be one of those breaking changes that we have. And it may come as the first wave, it may come in the second. It may make sense to just go ahead and knock it out while we're doing this, I don't know. But the general idea here is that I think we've made a mistake in trying to extend the typography, the text size system for Tailwind with the way we have with the type scale and typographic scale, trying to extend rather than replace. And the reason I bring that up is because keep in mind, we had this idea of replacing the existing spacing options just with a scale factor, and we have this option of like replacing the default border, edge, divide, properties with a new default, right? And these are just kind of plug and play, and especially now that Tailwind themselves is doing this exact same approach, I think we should follow their lead. Is kind of where I'm leaning, because I was worried this would be kind of controversial to replace features that are built in, but I think we should replace them but keep the same defaults they do. And so if you don't touch anything, it works exactly like you would expect from Tailwind. But if you do just adjust the scale factor, then it does something, right? What this would mean is that instead of us adding all these 13 additional classes over here on the left, these properties and these things, we would just lean into the Tailwind equivalent of those, which would be like text, XS or whatever here. And just kind of replace those in place, right? Like that's kind of the way we need to do it. I think I did this wrong. This should be. It's not when to copy this. I'm so sorry. I'll fix that later. But you get the general idea. So instead of us, adding to and still kind of keeping these additional, properties that already existed, and having the like fixed size versions and the dynamically sized versions, we just replace the built-in ones. And again, we set the default scale factor in the way that it will match what Tailwind is doing right now. But if you modify that, then it modifies those in place. And so the end result is that you just get to use these nice semantically named classes rather than these like generic number classes. Because this didn't really have any bearing. Like this was not always like, what's the difference between 8 and 3? Who the hell knows? Whereas like now we have 3 as base, which is the way we're using it. So it all just like aligns perfectly. Like it's exactly the right amount. The names are very semantic. It's the roles for those are exactly the way we're using them. And I think we just remove like one whole feature that people have to learn about. All they need to know is just that if you adjust the scale factor, then it adjusts, these classes that Tailwind typically provides. So still has the scaling feature that we're providing, but it removes the knowledge, having to learn all of these over here on the left. So super nice change. Shouldn't be hard to do. The other benefit of this is that we always had the problem with the type scale versions of these classes being limited only to font size. It did not affect line height, and line height is important for these. So you would get like these really big, type sizes, but they wouldn't necessarily have the letter, the line spacing that it should have. And so let's take a look at an example here. So if we look at, if we have any of the text that wraps, Here's one. So there's a little bit too much gap between this. These should be a little bit tighter, and that should just be defined by the text style you're using because it should affect text font size and line height at the same time. Line height being the height of the lines that will then show, trigger that gap to appear. So that is another change that I think we're going to make. It will be a breaking change in that if you've used any of these classes, you'll just need to replace them with their equivalents. But again, that may be a thing we can build into our migration tool that will just automate that for folks. Of, hey, if you use this, we're just going to replace it with the Tailwind equivalent, and then boom, you're done. Maybe kind of tell them that, hey, if you did this and also set your own line height, you may want to go remove that so that it can just use the inherent version of that. But again, some cool stuff. We can still build this into the theme generator and still have the dynamic scaling stuff. We just changed that. And then the primitives that we're consuming for things like headings and stuff like that, some of that gets folded into that. So anyways, long-winded version of that. I'm just mentioning this, it's not related to Tailwind, but I tested the project in SvelteKit. For some reason, hot module reloading is not working in app.html, so anytime I would toggle the dark class for dark mode or change the theme, I would have to do a manual page refresh. It may have been like that for a while, I don't know, but just calling that out in case that trips up anybody else. Anyways, like I said, I'm going to pause it there. I will share this in the channel, and if you have any thoughts or any feedback, let me know. But this should, I feel much more informed about how Tailwind is actually operating, and it's less theoretical for me now. And so with that knowledge, I think I should be fairly well equipped to sit down and start actually rewriting some of the plugin. The only thing we got to figure out really is just the tech that we're going to use for authoring some of those like repetitive classes that we write over and over and over, and we want to use a JavaScript loop to generate for us. How we can build that, and so either we can build our own kind of ways to compile that to CSS, or maybe we can look into something off the shelf that will just help that ease that process for us. So either way, that's what I've got. Let me know what you think, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody.